Cayman's greatest hits, this is gold. It's Tim. It's my first Wealth Wednesday with LOM Financial. We've been having them come through and giving you tips on how to plan for your future and better prepare for retirement. I'd like to welcome first Lewis Cohen from LOM, who's an investment advisor. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
And along with Lewis in the studio today is Daniel Altneu, who is a partner with Bedell Cristin, who specialize in estate planning.
Daniel, how are you doing?
Welcome, Daniel.
Doing well, thanks. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for coming by. So we're talking about estate planning today. And I'm going to attempt to answer questions of these guys who are the experts, and I'm going to be learning right along with the rest of you. So we'll do a couple of segments here, but let's start with planning for retirement, if that's okay with you guys. Is that cool?
That's absolutely fine.
I'm just going off my notes here that they gave me. Is planning for retirement a necessity because doesn't your pension cover your costs? Now, I had thought that myself years ago. I know differently now, but let's get into it. What's the answer from you guys?
Well, you know, obviously the significance of planning early for retirement can never be overstated, okay? Asking questions like, you know, does your pension, is it going to cover your costs? So you've got to figure out what your costs are and take very important steps. So the earlier you start, the better, essentially. Ideally, 20 years, you know, if you've got 20 years to retire, perfect. If you're only a few years to retire, that's fine, but you need to start preparing. For example, initial steps should involve calculating your anticipated annual expenses during retirement. It's crucial to recognize that certain costs, notably healthcare, which I'm sure most people would guess, can increase in retirement as you get older. You know, it really is important because costs do go up in retirement. So you need to allow for it. You need to figure out what your expenses are. And then you need to figure out, okay, how am I going to generate this income when I stop working? Okay. So upon determining your expenditure in retirement, you should consider the following. So you should evaluate any existing investments that yield income, such as real estate or diversified investment portfolio. You should also assess your pension entitlements to understand the expected weekly or monthly income. So once you complete this process, you will essentially have either a surplus or a deficit. So you'll either have enough income to cover all your expenses with leftover, or you will not have enough. So then if you don't have enough, if you have a deficit, it becomes imperative to devise a strategy to help bridge that gap.
Right.
So you can live comfortably in retirement and not have to make cuts in retirement. So to answer your initial question, yes, your pension might not cover all your costs, and it's important to check now.
I would say you'd have to have a pretty nice pension actually for it to cover the cost. For most people, they're probably going to have to do something extra.
Yeah, people have, I mean, depending on where you reside, of course.
Right.
You know, you get a state pension or you have a private pension, and that pays out a certain amount of money a month. So you can have a large pension, but it might only pay out a certain amount of monthly or weekly income.
Of course.
That you can't extend.
Yeah.
So that is the thing. That is why you should be asking these questions now. Don't bury your head in the sand. Ask these questions. If you have a deficit, that's fine. There's ways you can make your capital work for you, and the sooner you start, the better.
Well, the phrase that came to mind while you were saying that whole thing was compound interest. Start early, and that's how it grows.
Absolutely, yeah.
But specifically, then, with retirement in mind, how would you grow your capital?
So let's presume you invested $100,000 in an index tracker over 20 years that gave you, let's say, 7% annualized returns.
Is that pretty realistic or average, or is that?
You could probably get more than 7%, probably near 10% over 20 years.
Right.
But, you know, what's happened previously is not an indicator of what could happen in the future.
Of course.
But let's use 7%, you know, as a smaller amount. So your $100,000 turns into just over approximately $400,000 at the end of that 20-year period. If you were to add $1,000 a month, your portfolio would be worth over $900,000.
Wow. That's a $500,000 difference you're talking about there.
Small incremental top-ups compound to make a huge difference to your portfolio. We made the point earlier on, what do you do if you don't have 20 years to retire? What happens if you've left it late? You're late to the party. What do you do? If you have only a few years to get to retirement and you're dealing with a slightly larger portfolio, for example, you can build a fixed income portfolio to generate cash flow. So these are lower risk investments when compared to equities. They provide liquidity, provide cash flow, and an advisor comes speak to us today and we'll help you through that process and what that would look like. There's so many different strategies to consider in order to, you know, hit your financial goals. And unfortunately, we don't have time to go through to each of those strategies in regards to fixed income or equities. But come and speak to us. Book a consultation. They're free. We're in Commander Bay. you can contact us on 233-0100 or just pop into our office at Commander Bay for a coffee and just a chat. So I would say start sooner rather than later. If you don't have 10, 20 years to retire, maybe you're 3, 4, 5 years out, that's fine. You need to understand your financial position. Start that now and come and talk to us. And let's see what we can do to help grow your portfolio and give you your income that you'll need when you retire.
Lewis Cohen is with us today. He's an investment advisor for LOM Financial. It's Wealth Wednesday here on Cayman's Greatest Hits. This is Gold. We're going to take a break and come back and talk to Daniel Altneu, who is a partner with Bedell Cristin. He's here in the studio with Lewis today. He's going to be talking about estate planning and wills and other ways that you can improve your portfolio as you move towards retirement. It's Wealth Wednesday here with LOM Financial, and this is Cayman's Greatest Hits. It's Gold. It's Cayman's Greatest Hits. This is Gold. We are here with LOM's Wealth Wednesday. Lewis Cohen from LOM is here. He's our investment advisor. And Lewis, you're kind of like, well, the musical term would be you're like the DJ Khaled of advising, because then you bring everybody together on the track and get everybody that's best for the track together to make the best imprint, right?
I could not have put that better myself.
So one of the artists that you brought in to be on this new track, Daniel Altneu, who is a partner with Bedell Cristin, and he's here to talk specifically about estate planning and wills.
Well, as you can appreciate, planning what happens to your assets after your death, or if you lose capacity before your death, is not something that most people like to consider, and is something which often gets postponed.
Right.
But if you want to ensure that important decisions are taken care of in accordance with your wishes, proper planning is vital. Now, today we'll focus on talking about wills, which is, of course, one of the most important documents, if not the most important document that a person creates in his or her life. It's the document that disposes of all of a person's property on his or her death, and it essentially provides for the people that you care about most in the world by transferring that property that you've acquired during your lifetime. Amongst other things, a will allows a person to choose the beneficiaries of his or her estate, to select executors to administer the estate, and to appoint guardians for minor children. Now, making a will does not always need to be complicated. However, care must be taken to accurately reflect your wishes and ensure that they're not only expressed in a coherent manner, but also in a manner that may actually be effected in practice. A quick Google search will show that there are many resources available online to allow individuals to make their own wills, and that there are a growing number of unregulated will writers. Now, it's arguable that such practices will continue to increase as we adopt artificial intelligence, yet balanced against the development of technologies seeking to enhance the simplicity of certain tasks is actually the growing complexity and global nature of our assets, families, and wishes. And if a will is not properly prepared, you could lose control over your estate, an undesired person could become responsible for administering it, or worse still, acquire some or all of your assets contrary to your wishes.
Well, obviously no one would want that, and each case is going to be different, but can you give me an example?
Obviously, we don't want to consider what can go wrong, and whilst there's no requirement that your will has to be drawn up by a professional attorney, if errors are made or if the will is not witnessed in accordance with our strict requirements, it can end up being invalid, and the implications of this can be very serious. Not only are you at risk of leaving your family in a financial and emotional mess, but your wishes in respect of who you wanted to inherit your estate may actually end up being ineffective. A recent case in Cayman concerning a preeminent local family highlighted the consequences of a poorly drafted and executed will and estate plan. Now, whilst I don't propose to discuss that case in any detail today, I will just quote from the judge presiding over the matter, who concluded, "If there is a lesson to be learnt from this case, apart from the importance and desirability of family unity, it is that it is well worthwhile spending money on practicing lawyers qualified in the relevant jurisdiction to get things right, and to ensure that testamentary documents are duly prepared, signed, and attested. It is often a false economy to try and undertake important legal matters without the benefit of assistance from duly qualified independent lawyers."
And that's you, right, Daniel? They can come to you for that.
That's right, yeah.
There you go.
They can come to us, and similar to what Lewis was saying, we offer those initial consultations on a complimentary basis. So reach out, come and see us.
It's Wealth Wednesday with LOM Financial. This is Tim. We're here with Lewis Cohen, who is an investment advisor with LOM, and he brought along Daniel Altneu, a partner with Bedell Cristin. Daniel, how would this work if we would come to see you about a will?
Either we will just talk about it all at that first meeting, or I might send you some information in advance, some of the areas that you may wish to consider, some of the sort of typical areas that a will might cover. Typically, I would get a bit more information from you first about, for example, do you have children? Mm-hmm. What might be your wishes? Are you married? Essentially, we would go through all of those sort of individual requirements and then map out the plan for a potential draft.
Do you find that most people, if they're at that stage thinking about it and they come to you, that they're prepared already? They have a lot of things in mind?
No.
Or are most people are just completely lost with it, huh?
No, they don't.
Yeah,
they don't.
okay.
And also everyone starts by saying, my will is going to be incredibly simple.
Right.
And then when we
never
start
is.
going through some of the it's not. I mean, it is sometimes, but often when we start going through the considerations, those initial discussions generate more thoughts and ideas. And we often end that preliminary meeting with the client admitting that it may not be as straightforward as they first thought.
Well, there's all kinds of questions I'm sure they hadn't even thought of, let alone had time to consider. We're talking today with Lewis Cohen, who is an investment advisor with LOM Financial for their Wealth Wednesday. Daniel Altneu is on the mic right now, and he's talking about wills and estate planning. He's a partner with Bedell Cristin. We're going to take another break, play a track, and come back and hear more about estate planning and wills and how important these areas are for planning your financial future. Cayman's Greatest Hits, this is Gold. It's Wealth Wednesday with LOM Financial. It's Tim, and we've got Lewis Cohen, an investment advisor with LOM in the studio. Thank you, Lewis, for coming by. Also, Daniel Altneu is with him today, and Daniel is a partner with Bedell Cristin. We're going to continue. Daniel has been telling us about estate planning and wills and how important these areas are for your retirement planning.
So as an overarching concept in Cayman, it's important to bear in mind that there's no obligation to make financial provisions for any particular person or persons on your death, nor any obligation to maintain dependents. And that's because our laws here are largely based on the laws of England and Wales, which allow an individual complete freedom to choose who will inherit their assets. So now I'll run through some of the sort of integral parts to a will and talk about, what those entail. So first of all, executors and trustees. These are persons appointed in your will. Now, on a very basic level, an executor is an individual appointed in the will who administers a deceased person's estate. The trustee is the person who runs the trust that the will creates. Although the role of the executor comes to an end once the assets have been distributed, either outright or to the trustees, in reality, they're often the same person. So usually you'll find this is the wife or husband in the first instance, and the will name a replacement or replacements who will act in default, in the event the wife or husband has predeceased you or is unable to act for some reason. And usually we'll see those defaults being a mixture of personal connections, family members, friends, people who know you quite well, and possibly professionals. There's a lot of local executorship and trusteeship services provided here in Cayman, and professionals are often chosen if the role is likely to be onerous, or simply because the individual drafting the will is of the view that family members may not be up to the task of administering a complex estate. Now, coming back to what I was saying earlier, the common view is wills deal with assets, not so much other things. But when there's minor children involved, the appointment of guardians is vital to ensure that important decisions are taken care of and appropriate persons are appointed in the unlikely circumstances that both the husband and wife or a father and mother pass before any of the children attain the age of 18. Now, potentially that role can be extremely burdensome. Think about it if the child or children are very young at the time. And so when drafting the will and when minor children are involved, you may want to consider whether such appointments would be subject to any conditions. Oftentimes that means we advise clients it's preferable not to choose the same people as default guardians and trustees. And that ensures that proper process will be followed so that the guardian actually applies to your trustees to access your estate and your residue. And really, residue is everything that is left once funerary and testamentary expenses have been paid, all debts which you have at the time of your death have been paid, any specific bequests, so things like gifts of watches or paintings or boats, etc., or pecuniary legacies, gifts of cash have been provided. Now, commonly you'll see, residue will pass to the surviving spouse in its entirety. But if that person has predeceased you, maybe it'll be to the children in equal shares, or maybe there'll be a mixture of other beneficiaries, staff, charitable organizations, friends. And then when you think about children, if you say nothing, a child will receive their share upon reaching 18, upon reaching the age of majority. But oftentimes in Cayman, people are concerned, they may have amassed a reasonable amount of wealth, and they're concerned about children inheriting all this money at the age of 18. Having been an 18-year-old boy myself once, I think that would be disastrous. When it comes to children, usually what we see is stipulating an age at which they'll receive the money absolutely, whether that's 21, whether it's 30, whether it's 35. And of course, you hope that when you pass, your children will be much older and it will never really take effect. But if they are under 35 at the time, well, are you going to include some provisions that facilitate distribution in advance? Would you say, for example, well, the children aren't going to receive the money until they're 30 or 35. Well, at 21, I'm happy for them to have some funds to purchase a sensible car, or I'm happy for them to have a monthly stipend or a lump sum payment. Again, maybe at 25, that increases that lump sum payment. Maybe you're happy for them to have a deposit on a house, up to a certain percentage.
But what about if you don't have a will?
Well, if you pass without a will, or what's called dying intestate,
right,
you can lose control over your estate. And an undesired person can both become responsible for administering it, or worse still, acquire some or all of your assets contrary to what you actually wanted. Because in those circumstances, Cayman legislation decides what happens. There's a predetermined list. It determines who administers your estate. You'll not have a say in what happens at your funeral. You won't have a say as to what happens to your remains or who will look after your children. So really, if you remember nothing else from today, please retain this key takeaway, whether it's through Bedell Cristin or someone else suitably qualified. Execute a will. Otherwise, you could be leaving your significant others with a very burdensome task following your passing.
Well, thanks very much, guys. Daniel Altneu from Bedell Cristin has been giving us information about wills and estate planning. And this is part of the LOM Financial Minutes that you've been listening to for the past little while with Lewis Cohen, who is the investment advisor with LOM. Now, people can reach out to you if they want to get in touch with either yourself or Daniel or anything regarding what they heard today on the show, right?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to pass on details upon request. It's not a problem.
Okay, and how do they contact you again?
233-0100. Give us a call or drop into our Commander Bay office for a consultation. They're free.
And that's for LOM Financial. And you've been listening to Wealth Wednesday. This is Tim. We'll do it again next month. Thank you, Lewis from LOM, and thank you, Daniel Altneu from Bedell Cristin, for coming through today. See you guys soon.